Good evening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to Hilaal Live. My name is Faraz Patel. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us, and of course, my colleague Lukman Shadrack for taking you through that first part of the show from Cape Town. As we speak at the moment, the death toll in terms of the bombing in Gaza stands at over 11,000. The number could rise and could even be more, but we wouldn't know because of a lack of internet and communication from the enclave, making this even more difficult. The calls for ceasefire have become louder globally. Just yesterday, the UN General Assembly and the Security Council voted in terms of a humanitarian pause. And this has not just been from the United Nations. This has come from civil society to artists, actors, and actresses, and the list of names and roles within the world continues to grow. Within the United States of America, the organization Jewish Voice for Peace has been a vocal one, opposing the aggression on Gaza by Benjamin Netanyahu and his government. Joining us now is Rabbi Brian Walt. He is a rabbi within the United States of America and is also part of the Jewish Voice for Peace. Rabbi, good day, and thank you so much for joining us here on Hilaal Live.
I'm so honored to be on your show. Thank you for inviting me, Faraz.
It's an absolute pleasure. Rabbi, Judaism and Islam are so alike. We were talking about this off air, that there was a Arab Muslim little boy, a Jewish little boy holding hands, calling for a ceasefire, calling for the liberation of Palestine. When you look at an image like that, a video like that, it just shows how much unity has been amongst different faith groups over this last 5 to 6 weeks.
Yes, indeed. For us, as I've told you, excuse me, I am part of Jewish Voice for Peace. I was born in South Africa and grew up in South Africa. Just 3 weeks ago, I was on I participated in a Jewish Voice for Peace demonstration in the Capitol in Washington, D.C. There were 400 of us who arrested, and our call was for a ceasefire now. It was an extraordinary event because it was an event sponsored by Jewish Voice for Peace. It was based on Judaism. It was led by rabbis. I was one of the rabbis who led that event, and then was arrested also following it. And just on Monday this week, the same group of rabbis now formed as an organization called Rabbis for Ceasefire. We wore T-shirts over our, can you see that?
Yes, we can see it.
All of us wore T-shirts, and again, in DC, with the Capitol as the backdrop, we led a morning service, the Shacharit service. As you say, Islam and Judaism are very similar. We pray 3 times a day, you pray 5 times a day, and that we have the Shacharit service is our morning service. And we did a traditional morning service because we believe that the teachings of our faith are fundamentally the same probably as your faith, in that it honors each and every person as created in the image of God. B'Tselem Elohim is the words that we use in Hebrew. Our teachings teach us that anyone who saves a life is as if they saved a whole world. And anyone who destroys a life as if they destroyed a whole world. Now, you started your program by pointing out the horrific number of people who have been killed in Gaza in response to the killings by Hamas in Israel about a month ago. So that we believe that what Israel is doing right now is a violation of the most core principles of our faith. And we wanted to uphold that faith and to pray to God that we would have the strength, and that people in Israel would have the strength, and people around the world would have the strength to call on Israel to ceasefire, to just end the bombardment that is leading to this horrific loss of life, and we call for the return of the hostages, and we call for Israel and Palestine to negotiate together a way of living together with equality, freedom, and justice for all people who live on that land. I'll say one more thing, and then you can by all means interrupt me. The way I view it for us is that Jews and Palestinians, Israeli Jews and Palestinians, are locked together, are bound together as one. They need to figure out a way, Israel needs to figure out a way to create a space, a country, 2 countries, 3 countries, a federated country. I don't know what the perfect political solution is, a one-state reality, where all people within that state are given equality, justice, and freedom, just like it exists in America and in South Africa. That's what needs to happen. And trying to settle the dispute, the conflict between Palestinians and Jews over the land by armed force is a disaster. It's always a disaster. It's never going to lead us closer to peace. So that is the position of our organization, and that's what we do, and we will continue. We are a separate organization now from Jewish Voice for Peace, just because Jewish Voice for Peace is an officially anti-Zionist organization, and we wanted to appeal to as broad a group of rabbis, including rabbis who are progressive Zionists, because we want as many in our community to call for ceasefire. We have a separate organization with a separate set of things that we're working on. It's not fundamentally different than Jewish Voice for Peace in terms of what we want for the solution to this problem, but it is now just an offshoot of that original of us all being in Jewish Voice for Peace. We draw on people who, it's not related to Jewish Voice for Peace, so we draw on people from all different kinds of organizations. So that's what we did on Monday, and we will continue to call for a ceasefire loudly in our Jewish community, in the American community. And as you know, of course, we are not the only voice in the American Jewish community. The day after we were in Washington, the official leadership of the Jewish community called a mass rally, which was basically a mass rally against ceasefire, was to call for a condemnation of Hamas, to stand with Israel without criticizing in any way the attack that Israel has now launched on the people of Gaza.
Rabbi, I want to take your mind back, because I know that from South Africa, you, of course, moved to stay in Israel. I want to talk about the close proximity between the Holocaust and the Nakba. Because within that period of 15 years, the devastation, actually 20 years, if I stand to be corrected, 20 years, from, of course, 1939, when the persecution of Jews happened across Europe, to 1948, when the Nakba had begun. And the question is, how could history repeat itself? Because it's such a devastating time for the Jews under Nazism, and then for Zionism to kick in as 1948 began, with the Nakba occurring. As a rabbi, I mean, it really is a painful set of events, isn't it? That within that time, this had happened.
It's an extraordinarily painful period of time. It's extraordinarily painful that, in fact, you're noticing the connection between those 2 events in terms of time. In terms of my own history, my own life, I was born in 1952 in Cape Town, where you are, and that was just 4 years after the founding of the State of Israel in 1948, and 7 years after the end of the Holocaust. I was raised in a Jewish community with a fierce love for Israel, and also in a Jewish community that emphasized that the creation of Israel was connected to the Holocaust. And I was taught, never again, this should happen never again, which I live with that idea of the Holocaust never again, and I live with it in my soul as a never again, not only for Jews, but never again for any people, And of course, the Nakba, which started in by the way, the discrimination, the Holocaust against Jews started earlier maybe in the middle 1930s,
Yes.
Already the ramping up, but the actual killing of Jews was during the 40s, in mass killing of Jews. But in 1947, one of the responses to that tragedy was Zionism. Zionism responded to several different things. One was the fact that Jewish life was precarious in general in Eastern Europe and so on. Jews suffered pogroms, and Jews have suffered discrimination in Christian Europe for a long time, for 1,000 years. So the Holocaust comes out of that Christian-based anti-Semitism, and is based in Europe. And then European Jews and other Jews developed this idea of creating a state, which actually goes back to 1897, when Theodor Herzl had this idea of creating a national movement. Creating a national movement to create a nation state was not what Jews had always believed. Jews for 2,000 years lived in the diaspora, lived in different communities, sometimes very productively, in times in under Islam. It was productive in some Islamic communities, in some Christian communities, and there was also a lot of anti-Semitism that was experienced, and especially in Christian countries. So,
Rabbi, I have to stop you there. We have to go for a break, but we will continue this conversation after it. Conversation with Rabbi Brian Walt from the United States of America. Do stay tuned to Hilaal Live. Welcome back to Hilaal Live. I'm still in conversation with Rabbi Brian Walt. Rabbi Brian,
so
you speak about
another.
You speak about coexist. Yeah, Rabbi, right. We're back in this segment, yeah. The coexistence between Israeli and Palestinians, you've spoken about it, but under the government of Benjamin Netanyahu, can that actually happen? Because it's quite clear the modus operandi that him and his party are moving towards right now.
Correct. Benjamin Netanyahu, no, as I said earlier, absolutely not. Benjamin Netanyahu, I hope, will resign or be forced out as the Prime Minister of Israel, and that Israel will elect a new leadership, and hopefully a new leadership that is amenable and is supportive of working towards a settlement between the Palestinian people and the Israeli people. Like I said earlier, one that would ensure equality, justice, and freedom for all people who live in that land, on that land. And again, as I said earlier, I don't have the exact political orientation. My own leaning is towards a one-state solution where all the rights of people are all recognized within one state, but I don't want to be connected to insisting on a particular political formulation. I want to insist on a formulation that honors the deep values of Judaism and of Islam, that say that all people are created in the image of God and should be respected as being in the image of God and should be given equality and dignity. So there are liberal forces in Israel. There are progressive Jews in Israel. There are people who were demonstrating against this government in large numbers in all the weeks leading up to the Hamas, up to the attack on October the 7th. So there would need to be a new government and a change of heart on the part of Israel, not only to do ceasefire, of course, ceasefire is a more immediate need, but also to work to a time where the notion that all people are equal would have to be included in the basic principles of the new country that would be, or countries that will be created as part of the solution to the problem. But most important is, it's very heartening that you invited me as a rabbi to talk on this program, and that, as you said, as you started with the Jewish child and the Palestinian child standing together, that is possible. As religious people, we have to believe that that is possible. There's no reason why that couldn't happen. And we need to make it happen. And there are Israelis and Palestinians who want to make that happen. And we need to bring them together. If that doesn't happen for us, then we are headed to continue this senseless, brutal violence for generations, which would be a huge tragedy, not for both, for all people. So that's and that's an urgent thing for us to do right at this moment, to really be speaking to one another and to bringing people together to join together around a different reality, a reality that's based on our ideas of what God would want, which is that God would want us to recognize all people equally and to see the light of God in each and every human being.
Rabbi, the United States has seen a lot of pro-Palestinian protests. Of course, you've been part of it. South Africa has had many. Just the other day, Saturday, there was close to, and the number could be corrected, over 100 to 200,000 people protested in Cape Town. These protests, it's getting to the government, isn't it? The administration of Joe Biden, because the US Senate, of course, just blocked more military aid to Israel. How much of an effect, and you seeing it on the ground, have these protests and amongst the civil rights groups had on America's perception on what their government is doing in terms of aiding Israel, but also in terms of the Palestinian people and their dream of liberation?
So the biggest change that I notice in America, and that I'd start with, is there's a huge difference in the American Jewish community. And the main difference is that people who are younger, 40 years or younger, that's not me, are very much more critical of Israel and Israeli policy and distant from Israeli policy than people like myself, who were raised on Zionism and a love for the idea of creating a Jewish state and being nurtured by a Jewish state. So that's a big difference. And I think in general, so as to go broader than the Jewish community, so for instance, I think yesterday, the event in Washington by the organizational Jewish community, the major organizations of Jewish community, really appealed mostly to people who are older, and many fewer young people would be drawn to such a demonstration. So I think that will bring pressure on President Biden, and I think President Biden has failed in some very important ways here. President Biden should have been much stronger in terms of insisting that Israel not launch a massive, unending attack on Palestinians. Maybe Israel needed to respond to the attack of Hamas, but not by destroying the whole of the Gaza Strip and the lives of 2.5 million people. That's just a crime. It's just a war crime. So you're adding another war crime to other war crimes that have been done just before in October 7th, and also at all the times in the conflict. So I believe that I think Biden's in a very hard place. I think it's made it much less likely that Biden will be successful if he does become the Democratic candidate for the presidency, because on this issue, he has failed. He has failed.
Rabbi Brian, we'd like to thank you so much for joining us here on Hilaal Live. Much appreciated. God bless.
God bless you, Faraz, and thank you for inviting me.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Everyone who's listening.
It's an absolute pleasure. That is Rabbi Brian Walt from the Jewish Voice of Peace, giving us just how things are unfolding on the ground in the United States of America in terms of the activism and the pro-Palestinian protest. After the break, I'll have your latest in news. Do stay tuned.